Theodosius the Great had breathed life into Rome and brought stability to the empire. As it turned out, however, it was only to be the eastern half that he would revitalize. After the death of the last ruler of both halves of the empire, he divided it amongst his incompetent sons, Arcadius and Honorius. Honorius, one of the worst rulers, not just in Roman history, but in human history, would rule over the West for 30 years, being idle and incompetent, while Arcadius, also incompetent, would rule over the East and be controlled by his ministers and their affairs. With Rome divided once again, the East and the West started to fall apart. And with Rome, the spiritual capital, Ravenna, became the capital of the West, while Theodosius had restabilized and reinvigorated the East and its capital, Constantinople. He had also, as other emperors had, allowed the barbarians to settle in the lands of the Romans and had even hired them to be the fighting force. With declining birth rates, the Roman army comprised more and more barbarian officers, soldiers, and generals throughout the 4th and 5th centuries. These barbarians were then used to fight other barbarian tribes, who then would be placed in the Roman Empire and paid for hire. And when they were not paid or properly treated, they would rebel. And the Roman legionaries were nothing compared to what they had been, and often suffered mightily at the hands of these different barbarian groups, such as the Goths, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Lombards, and others. The glory days of the Pax Romana, with Rome's many great cities, its strong legionaries protecting its borders and expanding its territory, its many roads, all of which led to Rome, and its mighty temples and infrastructure, were all a thing of the past, crumbling under barbarian invasions, political corruption, low birth rates, and an economy that was on the brink of collapse. The worst of this came in 410, when Alaric and his Goths, who had originally been guns for hire for the Romans, sacked the city. And despite the best efforts of some of Rome's greatest generals, including Flavius Stilicho and Aetius, they were often met with disappointing results, as the barbarian hordes were just too powerful, usually defeating the Romans, and these generals, seen as ambitious and half-barbarian traitors, were often killed. With the army and rulers and economy weak, the Christian church was becoming the strongest thing in the western half of the empire, and the legionaries could not hold back the barbarian threats, as Rome's borders were overwhelmed by new barbarian tribes, such as the Lombards, Franks, Celts, and Goths, who continued to devastate the Romans. While the East, soon to be known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to flourish, experiencing an economic boom and having a robust army, they were not able to relieve the West, and the West continued to be devastated by barbarian invasions over and over again, as they were devastated over and over again by new tribes of barbarians, including the Lombards, Franks, Celts, Goths, Ostrogoths, and Visigoths. These groups were relentless and continued to settle in the empire and were usually either paid off or hired only to turn on them. Many believed, like Flavius Aetius, the general of the 420s and 30s, that Rome could hold on. A half-barbarian general, he was able to use his influence to control Valentinian III, the emperor who succeeded Honorius, to be the major defender and healer of Rome. However, as half a barbarian, he was never trusted, nor did he have the manpower nor resources available to stop the barbarian incursions. Instead, he turned to a more powerful barbarian tribe to help him. The Huns had swept out of the Asian steppe and created a large empire in Central Europe. They became allies to the Romans, once again being offered land, payment, and food. When this was voided, under the leadership of Attila, who had united them, one of the greatest conquerors in human history, they turned on the Romans, creating an existential threat to both sides of the empire. Having built a massive empire with many soldiers, Attila's forces were able to rapidly invade the West. These forces seemed unstoppable, but the Romans would stand in their way. The mighty horsepower and cavalry would be met by the Romans, mainly led by Aetius and a barbarian force at the Battle of the Catalan Fields in 451. It was an indecisive and extraordinarily bloody battle and one of the most consequential in Roman history. However, Aetius would not survive. He was assassinated soon after by Valentinian, who wanted power for himself, who would die soon after, and it was not the sword, but the Lord who would stop Attila, as Pope Leo met with him and parleyed, getting Attila to agree to return to his empire, where he died shortly after in 455. However, the barbarian incursions continued, and no miracle or intervention would save Rome. As the Franks ripped Gaul out of the Roman hands, the Celts took Britannia, the Visigoths took Spain, and the Vandals took over North Africa, the breadbasket of Rome. In 457, Rome was once again sacked, and this time, recovery seemed almost impossible. However, the East stood tall and stood strong, being able to settle with the barbarians, making peace and settling them in their lands as well as keeping up with their payments. They were wealthier and stronger. In 457, Maurian, probably the last decent emperor the West ever had, took power. He desperately tried to restore Roman lands and was pretty successful until Ricimer, an ambitious general, made sure that he was assassinated. Ricimer would continue to appoint figureheads and puppets until 472, when he also was assassinated. And with the West in total chaos, the restoration of it seemed impossible, even with intervention from the East. The barbarians had enacted revenge for years of mistreatment, lack of payment, and for centuries of oppression, conquest, enslavement, torture, and murder. The Roman Empire was on its last legs, only holding on to Italy, small parts of Gaul, and Austria. In 475, another ambitious general, Orestes, put his son, Romulus Augustus, on the throne. Aptly and serendipitously, the little Augustus was named after the founder and first emperor of Rome and would turn out to be its last emperor. In 476, the boy emperor, who was no boy wonder, would surrender to Odoacer. The king of the Goths would depose the young boy and send him into exile, and not wanting to take the Roman Empire for himself, would declare himself king of the Goths, ending the Western Roman Empire with no one to fill its shoes. Italy was soon occupied by other barbarians, including the Lombards and Goths, and it was soon after this that Zeno, the Roman emperor in the east, decided that he wanted the land for himself. He commissioned Theodoric of the Ostrogoths to defeat Odoacer and claim the land, which Theodoric did in the 480s, becoming Theodoric the Great. The Eastern Romans, later known as the Byzantine Empire, not until the 16th century, would continue to dominate the Italian peninsula for centuries to come. But in Spain, the Visigoths created a kingdom. The Celts took over Britannia, and later the Saxons would come. The Franks were establishing a kingdom in Gaul, now called after them France. Well, Theodoric's Ostrogoths took Italy, and the Vandals took North Africa. The Eastern Roman Empire would continue to survive, eventually becoming its own distinct empire based in Constantinople, speaking Greek and practicing Orthodox Christianity. Zeno would be one of many emperors in the East who would desperately try to reclaim the West. However, the Western Roman Empire was dead, and no effort by no emperor, no matter how great or powerful he was, could restore it. And with the Western and Roman Empire gone, perhaps only one more man can be considered a true Roman emperor. But the Roman Empire, for all intents and purposes, for all its great might, expanse, wealth, and ingenuity, was gone and was to never return.